Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming out this week, double Dutch at the World Gravel Champs in Belgium, which didn't look anywhere near as gravelly as Paris Tour, which was epic. I'll be looking back at both those races, as well as the CRO Race, Tour de Langkawi, and Coppa Agostoni, as well as another insane solo victory for Pogačar at the Giro dell'Emilia, and why Latvia are calling for the UCI to impose a punishment on Mathieu Van der Poel. This week in the world of racing, we learned that Tadej Pogačar's new wardrobe is taking shape pretty nicely. That is a lot of rainbows. We also learnt, or were reminded yesterday, that dirty faces win races. Now, that old saying is of course implying that if your face is dirty, you spent a lot of time hiding in the wheels saving energy. But I'm not sure you could have got through Paris Tour yesterday without getting a dirty face. It was absolutely, disgustingly epic. More on that race later, but finally, we learnt that the so-called Curse of the Rainbow jersey might have to go on a sabbatical for the next 12 months or so, now that it's on the shoulders of Tadej Pogačar. Or maybe he'll just consign it to the history books completely. So on Saturday at the Giro dell'Emilia, he became the first rider since Tom Boonen to win the first race after becoming world champion, and the first since Abraham Olano in '95 to do it in the same year. And it was another emphatic victory. On the first ascent of 5 of the San Luca climb, Remco Evenepoel was ripping it up for Soudal Quickstep, but the next shot we got after coverage disappeared briefly due to poor weather, Pogačar was alone out front with 40 k's to go. So not quite like his attacks at the World Championships or Strade Bianche earlier this year, but another long-range one nonetheless. And the thing was, there wasn't really any suspense, was there? Once again, he never looks to be in trouble. We never really got the sense that he might get pulled back. And there was that usual sense of inevitability about it as soon as he went on the attack. The gap continued to climb, Roglic and Evenepoel both climbed off, and Pogačar went on to take his 6th win from his last 7 days of competition. A 7th win technically, because he also won the overall at the Tour de France in that period. And so it's no wonder that there's a sense of inevitability to it all really. It feels like he wins more than he doesn't, which is unheard of in professional road racing. I mean, it's not quite at that stage yet, but this season, he's now racked up 24 wins from 56 days of racing. An astounding strike rate for anyone in any era, let alone a non-sprinter in the modern era of cycling. There's not much else to say, really. He's supposed to be lining up at Trevale Valesini tomorrow, although I am wondering if he'll skip that because the weather looks so bad. And then he's got Il Lombardia on Saturday, his final race of 2024. Behind him on Saturday, it was Tom Pidcock of Ineos Grenadiers who took 2nd, which was his best result on the road since winning Amstel back in April. But it wasn't being runner-up at the Giro dell'Emilia that was putting his name in the headlines last week. Rather, it was the rumour that he might be moving from Ineos Grenadiers to Q36.5. Now, when I first saw Ciro Scognamiglio tweet about this last week, I thought I must have accidentally stumbled upon a parody account of some sort. But then it was backed up by others, including Dan Benson. Now, I've got nothing against Q36.5. On the contrary, I've got a lot of respect for that team and what they're accomplishing at the moment. But at the same time, it's not an obvious destination for one of the world's most sought-after riders, is it? Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe, with the connections between the two, yes, but Q36.5? Not something that was on my radar, I've got to say. Obviously, there's a big difference between a rumour and the thing actually happening, but it sounds more likely than I originally gave it credit for. That said, as Ineos are always at pains to point out whenever there are rumours about Pidcock, he is still contracted with them, and he's contracted for another 3 years to boot. However, if these rumours are true, and there's any sort of negotiations going on, it means one of 3 things. Either A, Pidcock is really unhappy at Ineos and is desperately trying to find a way out, or B, Ineos are really unhappy with Pidcock and are trying to find a way out, or C, both. They're both unhappy and going through the complicated process of trying to find a settlement that suits both sides. Whichever one of those it is, it's hard to see how Ineos is going to get the most out of Pidcock, or how Pidcock is going to get the most out of himself if there are any truth in those rumours. Now, if you've got any insight or info, please let me know in the comment section down below, or just let me know what you think might be going on there behind the scenes. Back to Emilia briefly, and congratulations to Davide Piganzoli, who finished third on the day. The 22-year-old from Pidcock has had an incredibly consistent season, so well done to him. We didn't get to see much, or any actually, of the women's race that was happening on the same day. The weather in the morning was so bad, the host broadcaster said they couldn't get the helicopters up. In the end though, it was a win for Elisa Borghini. She attacked pretty early on the final ascent of San Luca and came to the line 9 seconds in front of Evita Music and Juliette Labou, with Hirschi Ziegart a further 7 seconds back in 4th place. Right, on to the gravel worlds then, and unfortunately we don't have any footage to use from the race. In the women's race on Saturday, 2 riders were head and shoulders above the rest, Marianne Vos of the Netherlands and Lotte Kopecky of Belgium. They were glued to each other right the way through to the sprint, and just like Omloop back in February, it was Vos who was the fastest to the line. She's won a lot in her career, obviously, but that's her first gravel world title, and it added to the 13 elite world titles she's already won in cyclocross road and track. What a remarkable career it was already, of course, and she's not done yet. In the men's, there were a sea of Belgian jerseys at the head of the race, but at the same time, all eyes were on Mathieu Van der Poel. So he attacked a couple of times in the closing 60 kilometres, firstly with Connor Swift of Great Britain on his wheel, then later bridging to a move from Florian Vermeers. And it was the second one that stuck. But a bit like in Emilia, there was a sense of inevitability about that outcome as well. Van der Poel dispensed with his Belgian companion with an attack at just under 15 k's to go, adding yet another world title to his collection just a week after losing his road one. Sticking with Van der Poel for a second, the Latvian Cycling Federation published an open letter to the UCI last week, calling upon the governing body to disqualify Mathieu Van der Poel from the World Road Championships. This related to the Dutchman jumping onto the pavement right at the outside of the group he was in at the time, something that was caught on camera during the live broadcast of the race. It led, quite rightly, to many people saying that there's one rule for big-name riders and another for everybody else. So a couple of riders have been disqualified from races on the spot for doing something very similar, or exactly the same. Most recently, Marlon Russe in Gent-Wevelgem this year. Now there's a good reason for the letter coming from the Latvian Federation, because their rider, Tom Schoench, finished 4th on the day, 1 place behind Van der Poel and 1 place outside the medals. That said, they are completely right. What Van der Poel did was clearly against the rules, and the UCI didn't even give him a fine for it, let alone a sterner sanction. Again, I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Is it a lot of chat about nothing, or did Van der Poel get away with it when others wouldn't have done? Let me know in the comments down below. Right, on to Paris Tour now, which is always one of the most entertaining races to watch in the autumn. It's not World Tour, despite it being a race with an incredibly long history, and given that it now includes a load of gravel sectors, it seems sort of ridiculous that the World Gravel Champs were held on the same day. In fact, Paris Tour looked far more gravelly than the Gravel World Championships. Just look at these images from the race. It's like an old school Paris-Roubaix, isn't it? As such, it was the real classic specialists who came to the fore. Mads Pedersen was the first really big name to make a move, but he made it a little early as it turned out. He bridged to the early breakaway. With Affini refusing to work with him, it put a lot of responsibility on Pedersen's shoulders. He was later caught by Laporte and his own teammate Matthias Vacek. Pedersen would eventually pay for his earlier efforts, leaving those two to fight it out between them for the win. Now Laporte is the fastest of the two on paper, but you just never know at the end of a long, hard race. But he did get the better of Vacek to take his first win in over a year. Jasper Philipsen won the group sprint behind them to take 3rd on the day. Now the first sort of other race I'm going to talk about from last week is the Elfstedenrace, mainly because it marked the return of Taco van der Hoorn of Intermarché. So his win there was his first since 2022, and it came after a long time away from the peloton with concussion, which he sustained in a crash at last year's Tour of Flanders. So he didn't ride his bike for over a year, and was actually more concerned with making sure he could live a normal life than trying to get back to racing. But he's ended up not only doing both, but winning too. I couldn't be more pleased for him. Well done to Taco. One man who can't seem to stop winning though is Marc Hirschi. He was back in action at the Coppa Agostoni yesterday, and whilst he couldn't get rid of everyone on the climbs, he did manage to outsprint them at the end. Latvia, Gregoire and Aramburu were the three riders able to stick with him on the climbs, but Hirschi was given what turned out to be a great lead out by the French champion Latvia. Gregoire also came past his compatriot at the finish, but was not able to beat the Swissman who was celebrating the 9th win of his season so far. I say so far because his season's not finished yet. He's due to do 5 more one-day races over the next 2 weeks in Italy. Right, CRO Race now. Please remind me never to book a holiday in Croatia in October looking for some late summer sun, because there doesn't seem to be much. It was mainly rain and high winds at that race last week. In fact, the weather was so bad, a couple of the stages had to be shortened and or rerouted. That didn't deter or affect Brandon McNulty though, who soloed to victory on stage 3, attacking with 41k still to go. Even a puncture couldn't prevent him winning that day, and he had enough of an advantage to win the GC fairly comfortably as well. Tobias Luntz came a little closer than he'd have liked though, courtesy of a whole load of bonus seconds that he and Team DSM worked really hard for over the final 3 stages. He won the 4th stage into Labin, coming around Wright and Zambonini of Bahrain victorious in the closing metres. The other stages all finished in bunt sprints. 2 of them were won by Alexander Kristoff of Uno X, taking his career tally to 96. Juan Sebastian Milano also nabbed a stage win, his first of the season, and that meant that 20 of UAE's 30 riders have now won a pro race this year. Milano's win that day came on a 114k stage that was covered in just over 2.25 hours, giving an average speed of over 50 kilometres per hour. The final stage of the race was won by Odet Kudut, his first pro win outside of Israeli national championships. In Langkawi, Max Poole took the first 2 pro wins of his career, so he won stage 3 to Cameron Highlands and held on to the lead he'd garnered that day through to the end of the race. Most of the other stages there also ended up in bunt sprints. Arvid de Klein took 2 wins once his bike had finally arrived in the country, but it was Filippo Malacelli who was the most successful. He ended up with 3 stage wins throughout the week. Now, if you missed out on any of those races, you can catch up with them on demand on Discovery Plus or Max, where you'll be able to watch a full season of bike racing. Just a quick promo now for our own shop. So if you'd like to support what we do, making a purchase over at shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com is a great way to do so. There's a huge range of clothing and accessories and books, etc. to choose from there. And also, there's now the option of giving us a super thanks. You'll find an icon just below this video, and that's another way to help us continue to make all our free-to-view content. Obviously, there's no obligation. I just thought I'd let you know that option is now there. Right, I shall move on to transfer news now from last week and start with Elisa Longo Borghini. It had been long thought that she'd be leaving Lidl Trek at the end of this year, and those thoughts were confirmed last week as she has signed a 3-year deal with UAE team ADQ. That will take her from 2025 through to 2027. She'll be joined there by Brodie Chapman, who makes the same move, as the Australian signed a 2-year contract with that team. Moving away from UAE though is Michaela Harvey, who's off to join SD Works Pro Time, whilst Natnael Tesfatsion is joining Movistar after 2 years with Lidl Trek. The Spanish squad have also recruited the services of 19-year-old Colombian Diego Pescador, who finished 7th overall at this year's Tour de l'Avenir, as well as a really big rider for them, Pablo Castrillo. You'll remember he won a couple of stages of La Vuelta with Equipo Kern Pharma. Now, before he'd won those stages, it sounded like he was all but confirmed as going to Ineos Grenadiers. But thankfully for him, he must not have signed on the dotted line by that point, so he was able to capitalise on the increased salary that would come with such an impressive Grand Tour. He'll be with Movistar for at least 3 years, as that's the length of the initial contract with that team. It was a big week of announcements for the French squad Decathlon AG Tour, so they last week revealed 4 new signings: Stefan Bissiger from EF, Callum Scottson from Jayco, Johannes Storner Mittet from Visma Leasebike, and Tord Gumdestad from Uno X Mobility. They've also promoted 4 riders from their development squad to their main team for 2025. World Under-23 champion Nicholas Behrens has also been snapped up by Visma Lease bike. So the German powerhouse had been riding for Lidl Trek's development squad this year, but because their main team is already at the maximum of 30 riders, they were unable to promote him. Their loss is Visma's gain. He's gone there on a 3-year deal. Harm van Elke is headed to Q36.5 after spending most of the first 7 years of his career with Lotto Destiny. Maybe he'll hook up with Pidcock there, we'll wait and see. And finally, Ellen van Dijk will continue racing next year after signing a 12-month extension with Lidl Trek, which is great news. Just one more piece of news before I wrap things up for this week. Grace Brown has taken up a new role as president of the Cyclists Alliance. Iris Schlappendal had been in that role since the association was set up in 2017 and has done a fantastic job there in that time. Brown will ride the Chrono de Nation in her rainbow band skin suit before retiring from the spot and taking up that new role in the sport, should I say. Right, thanks as ever for watching. I'll see you again on Monday to wrap up the final monument of the season, Il Lombardia, and all the other racing from this week. See you then.